Nation, there's so many reasons out there to start taking notes on the Rocketbook. I'll list a few. One, it's a reusable notebook. When you've finished with your notes and you've scanned them into their app, you can simply just moisten the page and then wipe off with a microfiber, and you can reuse that page over and over again. The best feature about the Rocketbook is you can search your notes. You will never lose a note again, which means you don't have to go back and do the valuable work you've already done because you can't find it. It is absolutely one of my favorite tools. Go to our affiliate link, scalinguph2o.com/Rocketbook to take 15% off your first order of $20 or more and never lose a note again. Welcome to Scaling Up H2O, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore. I get to host this fantastic podcast. And it's fantastic because so many of you out there, the Scaling Up Nation, make the podcast great because you send information in to me about what you want to hear, what you want to hear talked about, questions to get answered, and people you want me to interview. Now, in previous episodes, I have talked a little bit about finances. And many of you have responded back to me wanting to know more foundational principles. So I've invited a guest today that I know you are going to love. He's one of my trusted advisors. But before we get to that, I want to talk about some of the things that are coming up in our water treatment community. Of course, one of my favorite things to attend is the Association of Water Technologies annual convention and expo. That's going to be September 22nd through 25th in Providence, Rhode Island. And if you are a business owner, come one day early so you can attend the Business Owners Conference. So much to go on both events. They're packing them right one after the other. So again, if you're a business owner, you want to come one day early. And if you are in the industrial water treatment industry, in the same industry that I am, you definitely want to come to the AWT convention. So as you register for that, also don't forget to register for the Business Owner Series that we are doing in conjunction with AWT. That's where we take business topics. We do a webinar where you can ask your questions at the end, and you will leave with handles, things you can carry from that webinar directly to your day-to-day business and start doing that very second. Our next Business Owners series is going to feature Michael Wardy, and Michael is going to teach us everything we need to know about transitioning your business. Now, maybe you're like me and you're nowhere close to transitioning your business. You have no desire to stop doing what you are doing, and you're thinking, I do not need to attend this. Here's what I want you to think about. The better you can run your company, the better your company will be. The easier it will be to run your company. And the more data you have and the easier it is to get that data, the happier you will be and the happier all your people will be. One of the ways to get to that point is to treat your company as if it was ready to sell at any given moment. Now, our friend Marty Stevens on episode 205 used this very analogy when we go to sell our car. When we go to sell a car, we want to make sure it is as clean as it possibly can be. All the cracks and crevices have absolutely no dirt in them, and we call that showroom ready. We're going to get top dollar for that car if it's in that condition. But how do we feel about driving that car even if we're not selling it? There's just something about driving an immaculately clean car. It's shiny. It just feels better. It rides better. I don't know what it is, but I know you know exactly what I am talking about. Well, apply that line of thinking to your business. The business rides better. I promise you it will. And we're going to learn all about that from Michael Wardy. That's going to be on October 29th. So if you are interested in that, I urge you to register by going to scalinguph2o.com/business to learn everything you need to know about transitioning your business. Speaking of business, as I have run mine for the last however many years, I learned that I need to run it with the help of my friends. Now, that was a lesson that I had to learn. When I first started, I thought I needed to do everything myself. In fact, that's how I thought a good owner was a good owner, because they knew how to do everything and they actually did everything. And the more I immersed myself in people that knew what they were doing around business, and that was primarily in masterminds and other groups like that, I learned that successful people didn't have to know everything. In fact, what they needed to know is somebody that knew more about them, about the topic. And they found experts in all these various topics so they could call that person, let them know what was going on. And in addition to learning what to do, they also got the experiences that that other person had. Folks, if you are not in some sort of group where you can share experiences as well as advice, life is just too hard. The things that get thrown at us are too hard to do it alone. So I urge you to join a group. We have the Rising Tide Mastermind. You can find out all about that by going to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind, or you can find another group. The point is, you are going to get so much out of a group like that. Don't suffer through trying to find out mistakes on your own. So in my story, I found that me being able to do everything myself was the exact thing I did not want to do. And I found people that could help me with what I needed to make better decisions on. They gave me counsel, they gave me advice, and they also gave me their friendship. You're going to hear from one of those friends today. Ladies and gentlemen, here is our CFO, Mike Iverson. Scout Up Nation, we have a returning lab partner today. I'm here to welcome our CFO, Mike Iverson of Trillium. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Trace. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Mike, I can't thank you enough for how you've helped me throughout the years. I was looking back, you were one of my first guests. You helped me out with the podcast. You were in the mastermind group that helped me decide that we were going to do this podcast 4 years ago. You were one of the first people that recommended some of the podcasts that I should listen to. John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneurs on Fire, one of my favorite podcasts, that came from you. That was all 4 years ago. And can you believe that you were on almost 4 years to the day, episode 11, back in July of 2017?
Wow. No, I did not. Time flies, right?
So, yeah, we're well over 200 episodes now. And it all started because a couple of people in a group of trusted advisors said, Trace, you need to do this thing.
Indeed. Yes. And you sure have taken it to another level too. So congratulations on that.
Well, I appreciate the encouragement. I know we're trying to get you to start a podcast, but I won't go into that here. I don't want to give you any pressure, but the world is waiting for a Mike Iverson podcast.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll have to keep working on that for sure.
Well, Mike, it's been 4 years since you've been on the show. Well, kind of, sort of. You've been helping out the Rising Tide Mastermind. You came on last year. You talked to us about the EIDL, the PPP, and it was just incredible. All of our businesses within the Rising Tide Mastermind learned so much through you, and we now knew how to navigate that client. So I want to thank you for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It was a trying time for all of us, and I'm hoping that we have a lot of that in our rearview mirror today.
You and me both. Well, Mike, there might be some people that are just tuning in for the first time, and they're listening to Mike Iverson. Who's Mike Iverson?
Who is this clown?
Who is now? Nobody would say that.
Well, let's see. My three daughters, Mike. I don't know. I'm originally from Chicago. Came here to Atlanta really for school, but I've never left since. So I've been here over 30 plus years, and actually spent most of my adult life here. I'm a father of three girls. Been married over 25 years to a wonderful wife who helps keep us all on the go and straight and narrow, which is terrific. Started off in the finance area with a large accounting firm called KPMG. Back in the day, it was not quite that. It was a much smaller firm, and there was the Big 10 and not the Big 4 as they have today as audit firms. So that's kind of where I started my career, and then eventually meandered out of that environment and into the private industry and just various roles from auditor to accounting manager to controller to CFO and business partner and just a wonderful journey and a great experience. And here we are today getting a chance to talk. And you and I have known each other for a number of years through our common mastermind groups that we've been a part of.
Yeah, I was trying to think, is it 10, 11 years?
Yeah, it's been over 10 years. Yeah.
How about that?
It's great.
Mike, you told this story back on episode 11, but it's just one of my favorite stories. Your company is Trillium Financial. Why is it named that?
Well, it was funny. When I was getting started, I had a colleague of mine who said, put a story with the name. So when you name your company, put a story to it. And she said, it's best if, even though you're going to be doing professional service work, she said, don't name it after you. Mike Iverson Services or Mike Iverson CFO, or put a name to it and put a story on it. So I was sitting around one night bantering with my wife going, I'm not exactly sure what to do here. She's like, well, one of the things that my wife and I would do is we love the Western Carolina mountains and we'd go hiking up there. And I'm not the best identifier of plants and so on, but I could always pick out a trillium for sure on our hikes. And so I said, well, that's an interesting name. And she said, yeah, that I think that is an interesting name because, there's some validity to just the Trillium name itself. That's beyond a flower. And I said, what do you mean by that? She's like, well, think about it. We have some daughters, right? So the journey with them started on the third day of the third month of the third millennium. We found out we were having triplets. And so that's kind of the spawning of the name Trillium and going, well, the flower sounds great, but that's even better yet. That was the impetus really for saying that's the name. It's got to be that. So Trillium Financial is where I'll keep it.
I love it. Now, Mike, let's go back to when you found out that you were having a child. So you're like, okay, let's have one child. And then you find out it's three. What was that like?
Well, let's see. When we found out, the physician or my wife's physician that we were with, she's like, well, please come on into my office. Let me give you guys some paper bags because it looks like you could use a little calming down. And so, I was just sort of floored completely. And we both were overjoyed, but yet at the same time overwhelmed. So it was one of those things where you're like, okay, well, we've got quite the journey ahead and let's see what we need to do. And it's been a great one. The girls are now in their 20s and it's terrific. It's been a great journey so far.
Amazing. Well, I mentioned earlier you came on and helped the Rising Tide Mastermind understand some things that were going on in the pandemic. Nobody knew how to survive a pandemic. Nobody knew how to financially plan during a pandemic. There were no books that were written on that. You came in, you gave us some tips, you gave us some metrics, some things to look at so we can make sure our companies stayed healthy. You told us about some of the government plans that were going on. Now, as a CFO, you've endured the pandemic. The companies you've worked with have endured the pandemic. What's your outlook for post-pandemic?
I'm very positive post-pandemic. I think With it, the financial impact that we all felt was one that we applied from a health perspective. The economy was very strong going into it. And as a matter of fact, it was still very strong, really underlying it. It's just the fact that we had this health pandemic that we needed to, quell. And so we had to do some things that were pretty severe, and that impacted us economically. But coming out of it, I see a lot of positive signs. I see a lot of pent up demand. I see customers, some of mine, who actually shined very nicely through it, believe it or not. Now, they were in different industries that weren't as impacted. So, for instance, we all needed to go to the grocery store, still needed to feed ourselves. So those who were servicing that industry did just fine. As a matter of fact, had some of the best years they've ever had. Hospitality, another story, very difficult. And the travel and hospitality, entertainment, restaurants. But they're coming back out. And those who sort of planned and prepared for, just basically saying, I call it the oops factor, or you never know, there's a black swan that's going to come your way and you don't know what it is. It can be economic. It can be something else that just totally hits you out of the blue. It could be losing a very large client that you thought, hey, I've got this in the bag. It's a contract. It's there. We've had a great relationship for many, many years, but then all of a sudden it's gone. So those clients that were prepared, had enough cash on hand, monitored their businesses closely, I think they found themselves meandering through it much stronger than others who were not as well planned. And the government programs did help a lot, for sure. We had talked about that in the previous episode. They came around with another round of PPP loans. A few other, restrictions to it, but very similar to the first round, but some restrictions to the second round. And then recently with the EIDL loans, they've allowed for some expansion on that. Originally a certain amount, now you can borrow a little bit more to help with some capital. Because I think what they're looking for is how can we get businesses to invest in ways that will propel us forward from this point. And some of the economists I listen to that I like, they're seeing positive signs. They feel like we'll still go through the cycles like we normally do. Recessions come, and go. And so we'll have those, but they see mostly a good, reasonable trajectory at this point. So do I.
Well, we all hope that you are right.
I do too.
We are long overdue for getting past all of this. We're all ready for it.
We certainly are.
Mike, on one of our regular meetings, you and I were having lunch together. We were looking at some numbers. You were asking me not only about our company, but also about retirement. And that got us into a whole conversation that I had the aha moment that this would be a fantastic podcast. As you know, with my work with the Rising Tide Mastermind and speaking with some of the people in there, we'll talk about retirement. We'll talk about how they're putting money away. And a lot of people do a great job and they have a good history of saving for themselves. But there's some people, and it's mainly younger people, they will look at their retirement or whatever financial vehicle that their company set aside for them or something that they can do personally, that they're locking their money up. So I don't want to lock my money up. I want to be able to use it when I need to use it. And that got us talking about what do people need to know about retirement? Why is that locking up mindset just not the right mindset that they need to have? And the last thing I'll mention about our conversation is you said that we need to treat things as if we were paying a bill. We need to treat ourselves that way because we would pay the electric company, we would pay the gas company, but we're the last people that we pay. So I'm trying to wrap that entire conversation up. I just need to ask you about it. So where should somebody start with that? Why do they need to change their mindset, and what do they need to do?
Finance, it's funny. Folks say, it's all about the numbers, but whether it's business finance or personal finance, at least over the years, I've come to believe this for myself. It's about 80% behavior and 20% math. We can all do the math. 1 + 1 = 2, so, et cetera. We get all that. I think where we lose it is just sort of the financial behaviors we have. And so a lot of that is going to be your mindset. So for me, I know when I was starting out, while you'd think a finance guy would have a leg up, right? Not necessarily. I know plenty of folks who struggle with this that are bankers or accountants or other financial folks, and they struggle with it just like all the rest of us do. And again, it comes back to behavior. So I know when I was starting out, I'm not sure what got me to do this, but I always said to myself, if I pay myself first, if I take that off the top and I leave what's left over to live on, then I know that's the pot of money I get to budget for all my other living expenses. And so if I take it off the top, I won't see it, I won't feel it. And that's where that 401k, the time when I was with a company, and even with my own current company, I do it that way because I don't see it. It's out of sight, out of mind. And it's an easier way for me to sort of plan and budget. Some folks, when they hear the word budget, they just like, oh my gosh, they run. They just like, it's like the antithesis of what they want to do. And so there's been some mindset around, well, you don't necessarily have to budget per se, but maybe what you think about is this pot of money over here is what I get to spend. This pot of money over here is going to retirement. And it's going to also for my rainy day fund, for example, that I always espouse for businesses and individuals to have. Things are going to happen. You're going to have things in the house break. You're going to have things in your business with equipment break, and you need cash on the side in order for that to be fixed. So that's where I get to that mindset of let's put it off on the top, and that way then what's left over I get to work with. I think what scares some people too is they're like, well, I don't know what to put my money in. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff out there, and it gets confusing. I didn't even know a lot about it, but really, this area, when I combine business, finance, and personal finance, personal side of it is really, it's like a hobby for me. It's kind of scary, It's like really, I geek out on that kind of stuff. My kids just laugh at me. They're like, "Oh my gosh, here he goes again, Dad the geek," with his finance stuff. And so I've just been learning about it for the last 35, 40 years. Books I've read that run the gamut from, the Boglehead books to The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins to Tony Robbins' book. I forgot the name of the title of the book. Recently read his, and just a whole host of other resources like Kiplinger's magazine. So I would get involved in reading all that material and then trying to figure it out for myself. And, what it comes back to is you get into the market and you invest, and if that's where you're comfortable, some people aren't, and I get it, but if you look at the history of that, the market has always gone up in the long run, always. You can go back 100 plus years. Now, does that mean it goes up all the time, every year? No, it goes up and down. It's volatile in the short term, but in the long term, 30, 40, 50 years, it's always going up. And so when I started doing it myself, I started putting money aside, and then I thought, well, I really need that. So that way, someday I want to be able to retire, or at least if I don't retire, I can have this pot of money so I can go do something maybe that feels, a different season of life where I can do some different type of work. And the amount of pay I get from it is irrelevant. I have all this savings set up. It's been in the market. It's grown for years. So I just simply put stuff aside, and I started, looking at simple ways of doing it, like index funds, mutual funds. And I encourage all my business owners. I mean, if you are not setting aside your money on even at least a pre-tax basis, then you're losing out on a lot of great ability to retire long term using this, what Einstein calls the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest.
There you go.
And, he says, I like this saying, he says, there are those who understand it, and there are those who pay it.
Well, let me ask you about compound interest. So once upon a time, I was in my early 20s. Now I'm in my mid 40s. What's the difference if I started saving back at 25 versus 45?
can be huge. So there's been studies done, and I'm not going to get any of the numbers quite right, but they do a little example of a person who invests from age 21 to age 30, investing $1,000 or so a year. And then they look at a person who starts investing at the age of 40 or 50, right around there. And what they find is that person who just invests from age in his 20s and then stops, doesn't invest ever again. And then the person who starts investing that same amount of money around the ages of 40 or so and continues that all the way up to the age of 60 or so, the guy that's the 20-year-old investor has more money than the guy that started late. And he's put more in.
The eighth wonder of the world.
And it's just that thing. It's like once you start compounding it, it's interest on $1, interest on $2, interest on $5, interest on $10. And then eventually, what's the difference between earning 8% on $100,000 versus 8% on $500,000? It's different. It's huge. And so you just keep adding that on top of each other, especially in a 401k that is a pre-tax, non-taxable account. And all that compound interest is adding up inside that account over the years. I liked what, I forgot who I was listening to. I think it was J.L. Collins in one of his podcasts. He's an author of the book, Simple Path to Wealth. He was talking about an interview he had with John Bogle of Vanguard. John Bogle is what they call the grandfather of the mutual fund industry. He essentially helped invent mutual funds, index funds, I should say, mutual index funds. And he said, if it were him, what you do is take some money, you put it in on a regular basis into a mutual index fund, forget about it. Do it every year. Don't ever look at the statement, nothing. And then open it up when you're at the age of 60 and you'll be really surprised with how much you've got. It's just that compound interest is amazing.
Mike, during our lunch, we started talking about my retirement, and I gave you the question, well, how do I know that I have enough? And you gave me a formula, which I just thought was brilliant because it was simple. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Well, what we were talking about was, years ago, a lot of what I heard from the planning arena was, well, have at least 75 or 80% of your current income replenished. And the income is not really what drives planning, especially these days. And when you think about it, it's not the income, it's really what you spend. Okay, so if you spend all your income and then some, that really is not a measure of then having 75% of your income, you're not going to be able to retire because you're spending more than your income. So what I've come to study and look at, there was a study that was put out, I can't remember if it was 10, 15 or so years ago, it's been a while, called the Trinity Study. And it was done by Bill Bengen. And the Trinity Study basically looked at, over time, various different market cycles. What amount could you actually pull out of a portfolio of mixed investments that you could pull out comfortably for at least a 30-year span and not run out of money? And what they came up with at the time was 4%. So at the end of the day, meaning if I had a portfolio of, let's say, just $1 million, then that would say that I could pull out $40,000, do that on a consistent basis, and probably for the next 30 plus years, not run out of that money. Now, there's different theories and there's different, folks have come back and said, well, you're not taking certain things into account, which, true, there's probably different, they call it sequence of returns, and I'm not going to go into what that means, but essentially, when you go back and you look at it, what is a real simple way to look at least something that would give you a sense of what to look for in terms of your retirement dollars? And so I use that as just a simple gauge to tell me how much in terms of investments, or whether it's, in the market, or whether it's even real estate and the cash that comes off that real estate. I basically use that as my marker to say, okay, if I spend, and let's just take some simple numbers. If I spend $50,000 a year and I need to get that amount of money off of my investments, then what's 4% of a portfolio to give me $50,000? Well, that would be basically a portfolio of about 1.2 million. Now, sometimes that's like, oh my gosh, that's scary. That's a lot of money. But I talked to you about that investor who might have started at the age of 20 and invested. And again, I don't know the exact dollars, but it probably is, $1,000 or $2,000 a year at least. But at the end of the day, when you looked at it, you're like amazed that by the time they turn 65, they would have over $1 million in their pre-tax 401k account because it's compounded over the year. So I say all that, it at least gives you a way to say, well, how much do I spend annually? And then come up with at least a number that gives you a guidepost to say, well, this is about how much I might need. And then you work with a financial planner and somebody who is an expert in this field who can then kind of tweak that and give you more guidance in terms of models and your specific needs. And that way you can kind of narrow it down and tweak it. But I've always just sort of followed along that. I've enjoyed listening to folks in the financial independence movement like J.O. Collins and others. And he's lived that sort of process, I want to say, if I recall correctly, certainly over 25 years. So that's what you and I were talking about. And I at least give you a sort of a, okay, what's it look like? What do I think I need? And then you can then go from there and at least have a number to understand.
So somebody's out there listening and they're saying that they've got to replace $50,000. That was the example that you gave us. And divided by 4%, that would be 1.2 million. And let's say they do that math, and that is a scary number because they don't have anything near that. So their two options is they need to start putting a bunch of money away, or they need to get more return on their investment. Are either of those things really possible with coming out of a pandemic, with the things that we're going to see coming up? I'm just curious. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of it will depend on savings and how much you can put away. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there's that old proverb that says, when should you plant a tree? Well, 20 years ago or now, right? When's a good time? So whether you started 20 years ago or whether you're like, gosh, I'm in my 40s or I'm in my 50s and I got to start now, well, start now. And then what you can do is you figure out, what could I do? What do I feel I could do over these next 10, 20, 30 years of putting money aside? What could that look like? And then certainly, it's a risk reward when you go into investing, for instance, into the market where I do. I'm not a real estate person because I don't know real estate well. So I know companies and I know the market better than real estate. So you can go, and if you want to raise your risk tolerance and go mostly all equity and make a lot of small cap equity, you might juice up your returns and get a higher level of returns over a period of time. But you just got to realize it's a wild ride too. And you got to be able to have the stomach to say, okay, I can handle that. Or you have a little bit lower return because you want to mitigate some of that risk. I think the hard part is, I'll give you an example from me. Back in 07, 08, we had the Great Recession. What a perfect time to go, oh my gosh, I can't take it. I got to get my money out of the market, pull it all out. Well, I had the stomach. I go, no, I'm not doing that because I know it's going to come back. I know it will in the long run. I'm leaving it all in. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to add to it where I can because now stuff is on sale. So I know if I go to a store and I look at some clothing or something that I want to buy or a piece of electronic equipment and it's more expensive than I'm willing to pay, then I wait, until it goes on sale. and then it goes on sale. It's like, oh, great, I'm going to buy that. Same thing with when the market is going down. For me, that's a sale. And I want to buy more if I can, because I know it's going to come back up. And sure enough, 10 years later, I had more than recovered from what the downturn was and have experienced great returns. Now, here's an interesting thing about that. And I don't have the specifics on this, but in general, if you timing the market, folks feel like, oh, I can get out now and then go back in later. But basically, at the end of the day, over like a 20-year span, there are basically maybe a dozen or 24 periods of time that actual returns really contribute to the full 20-year return that you get. So it's not that many days. It's not that many periods of time. And so for someone to try to figure that out is near impossible. So I've always been a proponent of, for me and for any colleagues and business owners, stay with it, stay in it in the long run, and you will always see that it will pan out and you will see growth. At least I have. And I've been in the market now through 1987's Black Monday, through the early 90s recession, 2001 recession, and burst of the internet bubble, and the 07, 08, 09 real estate. Been through all of those, stayed in the market, and have been glad that I did ever since.
Mike, in our trusted advisors group, one of the things we try to hold each other accountable to is that we're getting annual physicals from our doctors. Because if we're not healthy, nothing else matters. Is it as important to do the same type of checkup on your finances?
Definitely. I know for me personally, what I do is once a year, I sit down with my wife and we sit down with our advisor and advisors and go over our plan. Say, how did we do last year? And then what are the plans for this next year? What are some of the things we need to account for? So I'll give you a great example of, a couple years ago, my girls were heading off to college. Well, up to that point, we were meeting annually trying to make sure we're on track to help them get their college careers kicked off. And then as their college careers have gotten kicked off, now we're trying to make sure, okay, as we finish that, what's that plan? Is it executing the way we want it to? So I think absolutely, just like an annual physical for your health, you need an annual physical for your wealth. If you don't, then just like your health, if you let that slide, on the other side, you let your wealth slide, it'll be the same result as if you let your health slide too. So both of them are very, very important in my eyes. And it's really been very helpful for me and my family.
Mike, for somebody listening today and they want to become more financially savvy, what should they do? What should they read?
It's a good question. So I've read just like a whole host of stuff. But some of the books that I've read over the years that I've really liked, one of the most recent ones that you and I talked about at our launch was J.L. Collins and his book called The Simple Path to Wealth. I really like that. He wrote it in a way that he was actually writing to his daughter and doing it because I, as a father, know that sometimes when I would tell my kids, or say, you need to think like this or do this, they look at you and roll their eyes and go,
"Oh, Dad.
Oh, Dad." So I think it was really smart of him to go, you know what? When the student is ready, the teacher is here. And so, or it's sort of the saying, and so he decided, I'm going to write the book that would give you the tools to teach you. And when you're ready as a student, you'll pick the book up and you'll read it. So I think that was a great way. I've also read, I can't remember the title, but Tony Robbins, who wrote a book on money management as well. I really like Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. If you are trying to get yourself out of debt, consumer debt, and on that pathway, I think it's a good book. I've given that to folks when they're in that situation and they really want to get back out of debt and into a more positive financial foundation. So And I've also, over the years, subscribed and read Kiplinger's magazine over the years. They've had some good tips and good resources there. Those are the ones that are coming to the top of my head. But really, it's, there's a lot out there. I think the best thing is start with something that feels right for you. If it's a beginner's mindset, or you feel you're further along than that, then get into some books John Bogle wrote a book also talking about investment. So I think if you look at some of those authors, what they've written, I think you'll find yourself in some good company with some good material to at least jump off and continue your journey. Because I still read a bunch. I mean, I just read, several months ago, Dale Collins' book. I hadn't read it before, but other books I've read, 20 years ago. Always trying to learn.
Well, I will make sure to have the ones that you mentioned on our show notes page so people can find those. Mike, let me ask, if you could only get one point crystal clear from today's interview, what do you want that point to be?
For business owners, as well as for those who are employees of companies, everybody's working hard and doing the best they can today. Look and make sure that you're always thinking about, how can I set aside some money for my future retirement, or maybe my future change of season. Some folks are like, I don't want to retire. That's totally great. You might want to pivot. What do you want to pivot to? Let's try to see if you can take financial situations or financial resources. Let's take that off the table and make that something that's already done. It doesn't matter. It's taken care of. So then you can focus on really what is it that you're passionate about when you decide to either retire or change your pivot and go into something that's different than what you're doing today. I have found that to be sort of really liberating for me. I'm doing what I'm doing today because I truly enjoy it. And I've been able to do so with the ability to set things aside and then eventually give me a good solid foundation so that I can continue for however long I want to do it. And that's a true blessing. So if you haven't started today and you're like, you've been sitting on the sidelines saying, I don't know what to do, I've got some savings, I don't know what to do with it, and get and start investing, or start researching it, start reading about it, take some action. Because there's no time like the present. And I don't care what age you are, it's never too late. It's definitely never too late.
Plant the tree today.
That's right. Indeed.
Well, Mike, when you were on back in July of 2017, I asked you my first set of lightning round questions. Well, you've already answered those, so I've got a new round for you today.
Oh, okay.
Are you ready?
Fire away. I'm ready.
All right. So my first question to you is, what would you say your superpower is?
I just have an insatiable desire to learn and learn about things that I don't know what I don't know, and continue that path. And realize that even as I've grown older, I won't say how old, but let's put it this way, I've been around a while. It's that ability to keep learning and keep reading, because I do believe in that adage, leaders are readers. So that's hopefully what I think of as the superpower.
Well, Mike, I think your superpower is you're able to take a very complex subject and make it make complete sense to whoever you're talking to. And in addition to that, allow them to now use a tool that was too complicated for them before. And now they can actually take handles from your meeting and say, this is how I can run my personal finances. This is how I can run my business finances. You are fantastic at that.
Thank you.
And I think that's where you got the nickname, the numbers coach.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
All right, Mike, you now have a magic wand. You can change anything in the world. What would you change?
Today, I think we're coming out of a pandemic where we all have, kind of had some shell shock, and just knowing that let's start getting back together when we can, when we feel comfortable, and just having these great conversations, regardless of what our backgrounds are, where we've all come from, and just really get back into that robustness that I think we've had before that's been missing. I know I've missed those types of conversations. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. I guess it's just a good civil discourse, is really what I'm looking for and excited about because I think it's coming. I think it is. It's just a matter of time.
I hope you're right. I think we're all waiting for it. But we all need to be part of it.
We all do. Indeed. Absolutely. Totally.
Mike, the book that I read is escaping me, but the point that the author was trying to make in this book was if we look at our lifetime, there were 7 pivotal moments that really changed the trajectory to get to where we are right now. What was one of those moments for you?
I'd say there was 2. One was, believe it or not, back in college. I thought I was going to come out. I really wanted to go into marketing and sales and marketing. But I had a class, and it just, for some reason, it wasn't working for me. I don't know what it was. But I remember talking to my dad and saying, it just doesn't feel, I just don't know what to do. And so his advice was, well, look, why don't you look at going into something like finance or accounting or something of that nature? Because if you can learn the numbers behind the business, then even if you go back out into sales and marketing, then at least you'll understand the numbers, and that'll give you a chance to, maybe help your customers even more because you know some of the financial implications behind things. And so that's what started me into accounting and finance, and I never left. So I think that was pivotal because I wasn't looking at this profession at all. It was not even on the radar. I think the other was our girls. That was a pivotal moment.
So having triplets changes things, is what you're saying?
A little bit. It sort of gave us this moment like, wow, things are going to change drastically from 0 to 60. So it was quite a change, but at the same time, it also gave me the impetus because I was going out on my own business at the time. And it really made you think, okay, I got to hustle. I've got to make this work. I got to put food on the table, a roof over our head, and clothes on our back. And we really got to make this work. And I think that was also pivotal.
Mike, my last question for you. What modern convenience can you just not live without?
My kids and wife will laugh at this, but for Father's Day one year, they got a coffee maker for me. That's this one shot. It's an espresso coffee maker. And I love coffee. I'm a coffee aficionado. And we discovered this on one of our trips over to Europe in Vienna. And I was like hooked. And it makes some of the best coffee I've ever had. It's like every morning I get to have my own little latte at home. And it's one of those things where when I go away and I come back, I know how much I miss it. When I don't have it. So it's one of those small little pleasures that I enjoy.
Mike, if I had a card where I was going to guess what that was, I would have put that up because you've told me about that coffee maker and other people about it. I know that's one of your favorite things. So we should have put money on that to see if I could have guessed that.
Yes.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on the Scaling Up H2O podcast again. And again, teaching us a lot of things that we need to start doing and giving us some ways to start if we haven't yet. Now, if people want to reach out to you and learn about the services and the tools that you provide, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to trilliumfinancial.com or they can certainly email me directly to at mike@trilliumfinancial.com. But going to the website, they'll see what I do and some of the products and so on that we offer as well. And certainly, for your audience, if they have questions or they're like, need clarifications on some of the things that we talked about here today.
Well, Mike, it was great talking with you today, and I'm sure we'll have you back again.
Well, thank you, Trace. It's been a true joy and great to be again with you. Thanks again.
Mike, thanks for coming back on Scaling Up H2O. As I mentioned in the introduction, Mike is one of my good friends. Mike just knows so much about finance, and he's one of these guys that can look at spreadsheets and just glean all this wisdom from the numbers. And when he comes over for a visit, he will look at our numbers and he will tell me things that I only know about the business. So, folks, if you are not getting the data from your numbers, I can't look at them the way that Mike does. But because I know Mike and because Mike comes to help us out, he lets me know what he sees. He teaches me so I can see better what he sees. And with all that, I'm able to make better decisions. Mike is actually one of the people that I first mentioned the idea of starting this podcast to. Mike was in my mastermind group, and I told him about it and everybody else, and he was one of the strongest encouragers for me to start this podcast. That was a little more than 4 years ago. And I'm so glad that I've had people like Mike that can encourage me. And I'm going to return the favor because Mike is thinking about starting his own podcast. Well, Mike, you did a great job here. This is not the first time you've done a great job here. I mentioned that you were on an episode before, but I know that you've been on at least 2 other episodes. You have been sharing knowledge with the Scaling Up Nation for years. And there's no doubt about it, you have a lot to share. So the Scaling Up Nation and everybody out there in the podcasting world wants you to start your podcast. So come on, Mike, the world is waiting. I started off talking about how I met Mike through the mastermind. And of course, I've started a mastermind called the Rising Tide Mastermind. And we talk about that on the podcast. So I'm sure you've heard about the mastermind before. One of the things that we do is we read books together, and then we talk about what are the different things that all the different readers in the mastermind are getting out of that book, and how are we going to help each other do something with that information. Well, one of the books we just finished reading together was called Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. And folks, this is such a neat book to help us figure out where to spend our time. And we're never going to get any more than 24 hours in a day. But if you can use certain techniques to do something now so you don't have to do it later ever again, Rory calls that a multiplier, and he starts to get us to think, and what are the things that we can do to multiply our time so we don't have to spend time doing it again. It's a great read. You're going to find out so much stuff about how you should be spending your time and techniques to spend that time. In fact, Rory's going to be on this show in just a few short months to discuss this book. But I want to talk about a concept that we really grabbed onto within the Rising Tide Mastermind. It was the value of your time. And specifically, Rory references the money value of time, or the MVOT. And simply what that is what is your time worth? Now, how you figure that out is you take your income and you divide it by the average hours worked. So here's the example. Let's say someone makes $40,000 a year. The average hours worked in a year is 2,080 hours. So if I divide 40 by 2,080, I get $19.23. So I know that if I'm doing anything, or if I'm not doing something that's not equal to more than $19.23, I shouldn't be doing it. Maybe I can hire that. Maybe I can pay somebody else to do that. And now I have the opportunity, especially if we are involved in activities such as sales, that I can drive that number up. So his point was so many of us don't do that because we don't have time to do that. But if we look at where we're spending our time, are we really spending our time on things that will make that MVOT go up and allow us to get a higher value for our time? Now, a lot of people say they don't have time to make sales calls. And I can't help but remember my story that I've shared with you before, but it really applies here. So endure me as I tell it again. My business coach, Tim Fulton, and I were meeting, and he asked me if I was going to do all these various things that I said I needed to do, but didn't have time to do them. And he asked, what was I going to do as soon as I left this meeting? And I told him I was going back to the office and I was going to cut the grass. Tim then smiled and asked me how much would I charge one of my customers to cut their grass. That immediately got me thinking about the MVOT, the money value of time. And if I paid somebody to cut the lawn around my office, I can then do activities that would allow me to make way more than what it costs me to get somebody to cut the grass. And of course, that helped me grow the business, which allowed my business to support more people. It allowed me to take time on my relationships, which meant my quality of life greatly improved. And that was all because somebody took the time to share with me, am I spending my time properly? Think about that term, spending your time. If you were going to buy something and you knew it was going on sale next week, most likely you would wait for it to go on sale because you would get more for your money. Spending your time, I believe, is that expression because if we look at where we're going to use our time, we need to make sure that we're getting the most out of it. So I urge you to consider spending your time the same way as you spend your money. Well, speaking of time, it's now time to find out what our next James's Challenge is.
Hello, Scaling Up Nation. The next James's Challenge as we grow as an industrial water treatment professional, drop by drop, is find and share parts per million, or ppm, analogies. A million is a large number to imagine. Parts per million can be even more nebulous and hard to fathom its true scale. There are some eye-opening analogies, such as 1 ppm is approximately equal to 1 minute in 2 years. What are some others? Please share your examples on LinkedIn by tagging them with hashtag JC21 and hashtag ScalingUpH2O. This is James McDonald, and I look forward to seeing what you share.
Well, thanks, James. Nation, if you have an idea for a show, please go to scalinguph2o.com and let me know what that idea is. People were asking me some financial questions, so that's why we started this show. I want to make sure that I am bringing you exactly what you want to hear, and the only way I can do that is for you to let me know that. Folks, I can't wait to bring you a brand new Scaling Up H2O next week. Until the meantime, stay safe. Nation, almost 2 years ago, I started the Rising Tide Mastermind. We have over 4 groups and a waiting list for a new group. Folks, it is wildly successful. And what I mean by that is that we are able to process issues together and get new ideas about how we solve the issues that we all face day to day in ways that we might not have come up with on our own. Folks, look into the Rising Tide Mastermind to see if it is right for you by going to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. If what you see looks interesting, schedule an appointment with me and we will see if the group is right for you and you are right for the group.